Welcome to the Impact Room, a business, CX and leadership podcast brought to you by the team at Douglas Jackson. We feature real conversations and powerful insight from impactful and diverse leaders driving growth, business, CX and transformation that helps elevate and shape exceptional leadership. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe or share if you like this content. Thank you. Hello, today on the Impact Room, I'm joined by Abbey Atkinson, a doctor in sociology from the University of Manchester and founder of Insight Change Ltd. Abbey brings rigorous research and a deep passion to a vital issue, gender equality and organisational equity, with a strong foundation in the insurance and the financial services industry. As a sociologist and a consultant, Abbey is uniquely positioned to challenge conventional wisdom, bring fresh data-driven insight to boardrooms and push for long-term culture change. So for our boards, leaders and those who want to understand why true equity matters and how to make it happen, Abbey has the answers. So Abbey, hello, lovely to see you again today.
Lovely to see you too. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honour to be here.
Not at all. I'm looking forward to hearing about and sharing about all the things that you've got to sort of tell us. So to start then, you made the transition yourself from the insurance industry into the doctoral research around organisational gender equality. So what was the moment or the insight that motivated you to undertake this research, and why does it matter?
Yeah, okay, great question to kick off with. So the motivation is probably because I'm slightly mad, but it's something I've always known that I wanted to do. So I'm a sociologist from undergrad, really.
Right.
My undergrad was in sociology, and I went into insurance from that. And I always had in the back of my head that I wanted to go and do further research, but I just didn't have my kind of, you have to be really specific and you really need to know what it is that you want to find out. And then as I kind of gained more experience in insurance, insurance gave me the topic and the field. Right. So as I kind of witnessed how I was able to move through the industry and how I was able to kind of start my progression and move up the hierarchical ladder. And taking a step back, I had to question some of my own behaviours because I think unconsciously I was feeding into a system that is very unequal in power. But also, as I was doing that, the kind of the duality of being a human being, I was also able to witness that there was a lot of talent being left behind, and people who were perhaps even far more skilled than myself weren't climbing the ladder, especially women, or they were getting stuck at certain points. And this wasn't just within the organisation that I was working in, it was industry wide. So I was market facing. So I had a lot of dealings with a wide variety of insurers, and also then kind of by nature you get to know other brokers, and I could see that this wasn't something that was specific and individual to the organization I was in, and I also could see that there was a lot of kind of want for change in some areas, whether that's superficial or whether that was deep rooted, but that change just wasn't happening, or wasn't happening at the speed that I would expect it to.
Right.
So that kind of gave me the field, I guess. So I was like, right, let's go and investigate this and find out why, and like why it matters. Well, for one, from an academic point of view, insurance been able to slip through the net. There is very little academic research that focuses on the UK insurance industry.
Right.
And no one has actually done it in the way that I've done it.
Right.
So that was kind of a really key area for me to fill. But then looking back at the industry, or looking into the industry, we've got the kind of constant battle for talent, the cost of hiring and poor retention, and then also the kind of continuing need for the industry to be innovative in its thinking. So all of these things kind of made me kind of lit the fire basically. And I was like, oh,
Right.
I started to love insurance, and I still love insurance and the financial services. And I didn't want the industry to get left behind. And so I thought, right, okay, let's see what I can do in my own little way to help support change. And then kind of more on a societal point, the kind of decoupling from the EU, so the UK from the EU,
Yeah.
meant that a lot of the UK women's rights in the workplace were left in limbo.
Right.
So I knew and still know, that if we don't continue to beat that drum and continue to examine and continue to scrutinize, that it's quite easy for politicians and then leaders, organizational leaders, to forget about the issues that and things that the progress we've made so far. So yeah, like that's kind of what lit the fire really for the research.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like a good foundation, and thank you for all that you have done. As I say, we can sort of learn a little more about that, which is great. So, I mean, in your words, you know, obviously gender equality in financial services and specifically insurance. Why do you think boards, executives, and HR leaders care about it or should care about it, and how can they sort of go, I suppose, beyond compliance, you know, and a good to have, to getting something really fundamental?
Yeah, really concrete.
Yeah.
I think that the current position, and this is just, I'm going to be quite blunt, but I do not mean this in a negative way. I just mean it in a kind of holding the mirror up way, is the progress that we have made, because there's been some brilliant progress, still sits at a superficial level. And by superficial, I don't mean fake. I mean that it's just that very surface level. And we have seen great kind of gains in some areas. So whether that's at entry level, where we're kind of at gender parity, and some kind of we've seen numbers increase like across the board going into those senior positions. However, those numbers are starting to slip back. And I think for HR leaders and leaders more generally, it's about kind of looking, we always talk about a leaky talent pipeline.
Yeah.
And it's about kind of really trying to understand what it is that is causing those leaks, especially now that we've got those numbers in the bottom. So we can't say, oh, we just haven't got the talent there. We do. We definitely have the talent there. And even if we don't have the talent in some specific areas of the industry, we're at a place now where women have, broadly speaking, overtaken men when it comes to education and educational attainment. So we might as well bring this together and like really kind of like pull on it and kind of squeeze the pips out of it so we can get as much as we can. And also the kind of, I think this has been known for a couple of decades, but it's incredibly clear for me now, and I think clear to a lot of other people, is the feminized roles that have kind of become what we've become used to. We've been able to encapsulate women's talent in specific roles that are perhaps not connected to profit and loss, and therefore don't have the same weight when it comes to decision making and things like that at board level. So I might have kind of gone off on a tangent there.
No,
but
I think you're still there. So when you say about these feminized roles, is that things like HR typically, you know, perhaps these other roles that seem to have a greater number of female to male leaders specifically?
And it's fed, or it becomes, because it's been that way for such a long time, it feels very naturalized.
Yes.
But there is tons of research, and whilst I can't recall specific names right now, I'm more than happy to provide you with references for notes. That is not just UK based, but globally based as well, that shows that at undergrad level there is no difference in kind of what women and men want to do with ambition
Yeah.
and where they want to go. It's something that is socialized, and once we get into the workplace, I think we're slapped even harder with that socialization, and that kind of has led to the divergence in roles, which either consciously or unconsciously, depending on how you look at it, leaves the power, so to speak. So a lot of what I talk about is power, in the hands of roles that are still heavily male roles, and the feminized roles have limited power.
Yeah, interesting. And you talked about this leaky pipeline, and I've talked about it quite a few times. I speak to Sandra Lewin. I don't know if you know the women in 100 insurance. We've talked about it, and yeah, I mean, do you get a sense of why it's happening? Because even for myself, I started my career in insurance. Funnily enough, I worked in an insurance broker, and then I worked for the AA Insurance Services, and they were a big insurance firm, and there were lots of women at the entry level. Then when I think back when I was working in the shops and in the telesales, it was more women than men. But as soon as you got past branch manager level, then it was a sea of male white men, typically. And so what obviously then perhaps 20, 30 years ago, different world to what it is now, but why is that happening now? Do you get a sense, or can you share any of those sort of things you've seen, perhaps, Abby?
It's a really complex question, but one that I deal with within my kind of research, and I look at it from what I call role habitus. So focusing on insurance, let's take a kind of elite income generating role that tends to lead to those more powerful positions in leadership. Those roles have such an entrenched way of being, and that's because they've got hundreds of years of history behind them. And they have changed, but the change is very slow in comparison to how society has changed. And those roles are so powerful in their own way that they almost have a way of being outside of the worker. So the worker has to then fit the role. And the role, again, is so powerful that it has the ability to absorb policy and practice that might be there to promote a more equitable workplace. So I talk at length, or have written at length, about flexible working, and how some, for example, let's say line underwriters or something of that kind of equivalent level. A lot of my data, anyone who's in a line underwriting position kind of says, this is not a part-time role, this is not a flexible role. And it's that inability to look at how the role should mold to practice rather than the practice role mold to the role. And then the role absorbs it. So then you have the flexible working where someone will be like, okay, I get to work from home one day a week, and that means I start at 7 a.m. because I'm not commuting. So you're starting earlier, which you're not technically getting paid for. And then you finish a lot later, and probably you don't get up as much from your desk during the day. You don't make yourself the same amount of cups of coffee or whatever it might be. And the role is then benefiting rather than the worker. So the role is kind of seen as more productive. So rather than the flexible working saying, okay, I'm able to pick my child up from daycare, which that might be a truth, but then you're not making up the time, you're making back the time kind of double, triple, quadruple, and working a lot later into the evening than what you would if it wasn't called flexible working. And it's something that is really interesting, and I think it's a really clear signal to leaders that policy has to also be coupled with culture. And that it's great to have the policies there, but unless you really look at the kind of how that policy then plays out in individual roles, you are going to come up against the same barriers. So women use flexible working more than men. That is something that we know from the statistics. And therefore they're going to be if if they're in these kind of prestigious income generating roles, they're going to be getting closer to burnout and burning out quicker than their male counterparts. Therefore, they may make a decision to move horizontally or leave altogether. So I do think that kind of we need to understand the individual roles, particularly those that lead to leadership, and understand their history and their ability to change policy in order to kind of like help plug the leaks, so to speak.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Thank you. So, I mean, you've observed many organisations and various investments in gender equality, diversity and inclusion. Yet you've commented yourself that some don't achieve the progress as expected. So from your research, what do you see as one of the biggest barriers blocking traction?
Okay, so one of the biggest barriers, I think this links back to understanding the role of the history of a role, organizations understanding themselves. So an organization understanding how it's got to where it is, its weaknesses, but then also something that I do with my work is really shine a light on the positives. So pull out those positives so you can use those, because there will be positives there. And it's just using those as a springboard, because there will be organizations that, yes, they might have 5 or 6 weaknesses, but they've probably got 5 or 6 positives as well. So rather than just concentrating on the weaknesses, you need to kind of do both at the same time and use those positives as a springboard. And I think that organizations that don't pause and don't take that moment to understand themselves are at risk of setting themselves up to fail, because they either implement policy that isn't right for them and doesn't fit their needs, or is something that might be right for them in 2 years' time, once they've kind of got those foundations, or they don't understand the problem that they're trying to fix. So they try to fix something else completely different. And it can be a genuine misdiagnosis, but then that obviously creates a leadership kind of negative vibe or negativity towards the want to continue to investigate and change, because it can be seen as a drain of resource, which is very true. And I think that you need the data to be able to target your resource to be able to get the most out of it. So
yeah, I think it's something that we see, and I always liken sort of EDI initiatives. I think they're very similar to things like customer experience and transformation, and these initiatives, which are all critical to a business success failure. I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, I think sometimes it fails because it's dealt with in isolation, yet it has to be in everything. It has to be everywhere, and it has to be lived and breathed. And if it's just dealt with there, because you deal with transformation, or you deal with CX, or you deal with EDI, it never infiltrates, and therefore that's where I think a lot of businesses come unstuck. What do you think to that?
100% agree. And that is what I tried to get across with my work with Insight Change, is that this is not a women's issue. This is not I don't know, let's say accounts department issue if they've got a bit of a problem. This is a company issue. And I really try to break that down. And then those companies that do stick with me and are willing to go on that journey, see abundance of improvement across the board. So whilst we might be targeting, I don't know, let's say accounts has got an issue, whilst we might start there, the change kind of culturally disseminates across the rest of the company. And that isn't bound by gender either, that it benefits men and women and everyone else in between, like equally. So
excellent. So is that, I mean, well, what is the one thing that you think an organization could focus on perhaps then to start making real progress?
One thing other than speaking to me and Insight Change is getting the real data, and that I do think a third party does help with that, because I'm talking about going beyond staff surveys and having someone go in and be able to crack open the workforce to gain like validity from the data, and this is a one long point, so I do apologize, and not to be scared of it. So hold that mirror up and actually look at what the data is telling you, because I think, or from what I've seen, a lot of the time data is manipulated to then paint, or staff survey data, sorry, is manipulated to paint not so bad picture, when actually you're not going to get anything out of that. And then, like you say, kind of connect it to it being a company issue rather than an individualized or siloed issue. Yeah, that's where I would start.
Great. Okay. So looking at the positives then, obviously
Yes.
we've talked about enablers for women's progression.
Yes.
Which 3 skills, behaviours or organisational changes have you found that make the most difference in enabling upward mobility for women and, maybe even other underrepresented groups?
Yeah. So this is kind of the bit that I love, the positive side of stuff, the positive bit. So organizations, this is solely from a research point of view rather than me going in practically and working with organizations. Organizations that I've seen do really well. First of all, stop treating women's progression as a women's problem. And like you say, treat it as a company problem. So really take that holistic approach to it, and encourage men to be involved. And that can be from education, or that can be from employee resource groups, but also more importantly from a policy point of view. So things like a proper, robust paternity leave, or something along those lines, depending on what it is that we're talking about. And yes, the uptake might be slow at first, but then once a few people have done it, people talk, and that kind of change happens quite organically. So I think kind of treating it as like you say, a company problem. And then organizations that do really well fund it properly, so they don't rely on free labor. So when it comes to setting up, whether it's women, whether it's LGBTQ plus, whether it's black people, whether it's Asian, like whatever it is that we're talking about diversity wise, rather than relying on employee resource groups that are underfunded or not funded at all, and relying on people that are already doing full-time jobs, probably already have some element of care or outside pressure, and then going, here's another job for you to do on top of that. So actually sitting down and thinking, right, we need to get funds to this. How much can we fund it? And then making a practical plan from that. I see that works really, really well. And then something kind of looking at the individual is understanding the difference in mentoring styles, and understanding the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I think that's a big one, because women, generally speaking, have 2 very different needs when it comes to mentoring. And that can be the emotional side, the kind of personal support side, but then they also have the need for the kind of robust professional side as well. And I think a lot of companies miss those differences, and then miss out altogether sponsorship. So they might be like, oh, it's great, we've got a really good mentorship program, and they might have a great mentorship program, but those mentors might not be sitting in the boardroom. They might not be sitting in the decision-making arenas. So I think that companies that can really crack the code around mentorship and sponsorship also do really well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that is. And again, just something to that point, which again, I'd be interested in your thoughts on. We find that networking, similar to sponsorship, is a big challenge or opportunity, I think, certainly for women, because we don't network the same as men. And certainly in this day and age, I'm not going to want to go to a bar probably after work with a group of male colleagues, right? Especially if I've got a family and or some other commitments outside of work. But as you've said, that sponsorship, these people and it is a lot of men have fantastic networks and are really good at connecting people and giving people a leg up and putting the ladder down, and I find that women sometimes they lose that network, especially when they're busy in their careers and then life comes along. But I do find that that's a real opportunity, as I say, or challenge, similarly to the sponsorship side, because they need these allies, these individuals with seniority to help them in their careers, whether it be internally or externally. What do you think about that, Abby?
Networking is another area that I've written extensively about, and pulled a lot from my research on. And it's something I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about kind of sharing on. So like you say, women do network very differently and have a million different pulls on them. And some men also have those pulls.
Yeah, of course.
And networking is seen very individualized, whereas organizations should see it as an organizational skill. So women, and this, I'm just going to say this, and however it comes out, it comes out. So we've done a great job at pulling together women in X networks. And some of those networks are awesome. They are really robust. They really kind of help connect people. They help with the soft skills, which actually I find quite hard skills, and help really build confidence and strength. And other networks are not so successful. And I find that those networks encapsulate the problem and put a nice bow around it, so that people and organizations don't have to think more deeply about it. They go, it's okay because we've got women in X group, and we've done that. And all that does is mean that women are recycling their own kind of connections rather than building upon those connections. And I think that goes also to the fact that we all know how important visibility is, but because there is a limited number of women at the top, those who are at the top are pulled on constantly to come to these events, to give more of their time. And it isn't shared equally. So we should be pulling on men as well to come to these events. And then, like you say, not everybody wants to go to the pub or after work. And that is, I mean, my data says it really strongly, but also industry data says it very strongly. That is still the kind of very accepted method of networking, whether we like it or not. That is just how it still is. So again, if we look at it from an organizational skill rather than an individual skill, it means that organizations need to be investing more, whether that's time, whether that's actual resources, into thinking about different ways, and also saying, okay, networking events might start at 3, so Abby can leave at 3 to go to networking because she has to leave at 5, so she can at least get those 2 hours in, rather than it being networking starts at 5:30 or 6 or whatever it is. And we know that from research that men are much more likely to go for lunch, go to the pub for lunch, and they won't ask permission of their senior to do so. Whereas a woman is less likely to attend a breakfast networking event because she has to ask explicitly for permission. So I think it's just, again, about organizations being a bit more creative with how they approach, because it is a skill and it is something that is vital to progression. So yeah, just kind of thinking a bit more creatively about how we can expand the time and the type of networking that we do.
Fabulous. Thanks for sharing on that. And I think, as you say, I think more interdepartmental, inter-level networking is critical, both internally and externally.
Massively.
I think it's, as I say, a massive challenge and opportunity. So fabulous. So I mean, you're passionate about making this research accessible and actionable, hence why you're here. Thank you. And for the industry. So I mean, if you were advising, let's say, a mid-sized insurer today, what would your top strategic action be, that they could take in the next 90 days to shift from being aware of
Yeah.
gender equality to actually starting to be effective or put something into place?
Okay. This is a great question because I get it asked in lots of different ways all the time.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people ask it as a quick win, which I tend to step away from. However, it starts with listening and conversation. So, for a mid-sized firm to start to make that change, or at least kind of begin the journey of change, the conversation first needs to start, but it needs to come, we need to swap the conversation tone from coming from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, so that we're kind of moving away from the gender wars type trap that we can slip into when we start to look at equality. And also stop being scared of making minor mistakes. So once that conversation has started, when I have done research with men specifically, and this was not for my doctorate, but this is in other work that I've done, something that comes out time and time again is the scare factor.
Yeah.
So they are scared to come to the table because they don't want to make a mistake. And I think there's a big thing around cancel culture in our society. And that's a debate for another time. But yeah, I think changing that conversation, don't be scared of making mistakes as long as your intentions are to be good, to want to progress, and then shifting the focus from the individual to what I would refer to as invisible. So that kind of links back to what you were saying around looking at it from an organizational problem point of view. So rather than going, oh, let's get another women in insurance day or women in another training program or something along those lines, we start to look at the layer beneath. So what is it that these women are sitting on top of? What is it that our company sits on top of? So, and that again starts with conversation. It just starts by, it doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes a bit of time to kind of sit down in a room and really start to kind of have honest conversation.
Yeah, excellent. And I do think those points are so important. As you say, it's not always throwing money at it, and it's not really complicated, is it? I think there is just this, as you've said, holding that mirror up, coming from a good, honest place and doing the right thing, right?
Yes.
And if everybody is there to do the right thing, you'll do the right thing regardless of, a mistake or failure, or having that psychological safety, I suppose, within an organization where everybody's like, look, we're all in this together. We might say the wrong thing, we might just phrase something wrong, but bear with me, just tell me, and I'm sorry. And it's so important, yet so often those, I think, fundamentally missed, those little things.
Definitely. And it's something that I do a lot with my work when I go into organizations, is, like you say, create that kind of safe environment, especially when I'm dealing with leadership, because leaders don't like to kind of make mistakes or kind of slip up here and there. And I drop language. So I'm not there to use technical language and confuse the problem. Like you say, it can be quite simple. So it's about talking as we've turned up that day. And then when healthy debate is happening, allow it to happen, but in a controlled and empathetic and compassionate way. Because I think that it can be quite a divisive subject. And something that I find quite rewarding to do, although at times it's quite challenging, is being able to take people's thinking and viewpoint and really help them unpack it and be like, okay, well, let's look at why we think like this. And then once you start to do that and do that successfully, it's great, because then people start to actually take that moment to pause and go, okay. And it's again kind of a bit like an education point, I guess. It's they just didn't have that knowledge, which is why they had that thought. And it's just about kind of pulling back. Everything I do like roots back from the individual through to the organization and then to society. So it's really peeling all those layers back so that people can truly understand what it is that they're trying to talk about, and then can form informed views.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And just whilst we're talking about views and thoughts, and
Mm.
my mind just jumped to another something that we haven't talked about yet, and I'd love your thoughts on it, because we have seen and I think I don't want to say this often happens, so hence I'd like your sort of counsel, but when an organization starts to become, let's say, more diverse and have more voices at the table and have more diversity of thought, what I think sometimes can happen is, as you say, these that they're having these discussions and maybe they are a little bit fiery, and because people are all of a sudden not agreeing, because all of a sudden now we haven't just hired, the same person that was educated at the same place, that went to the same school, that came through the same funnel or channel, and all of a sudden everyone's like, yeah, this is the way to do it, this is the way we should go, and then someone's like, well, no, hang on a second, and there becomes this fraction or friction in the conversation, and I think businesses can then go, oh my gosh, the leaders, they're all not getting on, they're all quarreling, or they're coming from different places. Do you see that as a sort of issue when these programs start to emerge, and how do businesses deal with that to get to the better place, rather than then going, oh goodness, we can't have this, and pull back from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always come from the standpoint that deviance is the key to progression.
Right.
So having those more fiery debates will eventually lead to progression. However, it is important to have those debates within a space that is respectful.
Yes.
And having a facilitator there, so whether that's someone like myself or a third party, or someone who's actually internal, who's really good at kind of making sure that everyone gets to speak and controlling the conversation, that is vital at first.
Yeah.
Because people are very personal, or because they are personal issues, they're part of our identity. For example, if we're talking about gender, we're both women, so we are going to feel very impassioned about it. And once those conversations are normalized, the personalization doesn't drop away from them, but you're able to kind of calm your passions about it, if that makes sense. So it's not like, oh my God, I need to be here right now to say everything I've got to say. It's like, I can say my piece, and I know that I can say it again next week, and I'm going to be listened to again. So it's about time, and how, like, being able to kind of repeat the process a few times to be able to create security, that people don't feel like this is their one and only chance to speak. And then also having a really good facilitator, but then also providing education if possible. So that's how I facilitate via education. So I kind of help people understand where these viewpoints have come from. And I think that that's quite key, because I mean, I even use it when I'm in the pub and I'm listening to people debate, and they can't kind of come. I mean, sometimes it's fine to walk away and be like, okay, we're never going to agree on this. But when you're a leader and you're trying to kind of come up with a plan, that's not possible. So being able to understand why each other are thinking so differently can really help bring you both together. Even if the point isn't exactly how you want it, you can find some kind of peace in that common ground.
And I think, I mean, you mentioned earlier the cancel culture, and I think socially we're moving away from a place where we can debate and disagree. It's quite frightening generally, isn't it? I mean, and I think the reality is, the more that we talk to someone, the more commonality we seem to have.
100%.
The more things we find we have in common, and whether it be, like you said, we're both women, but we're probably extremely different. You things that you would want or talk about could be totally different to myself, but we might both love travel, or we might both want to talk about children, or you find that common ground, don't you, that brings people together. So as you say, another skill I think that as society we seem to be losing, but I think businesses and the roles they play, if they can help us be better at that, all the better for everybody, really.
Definitely. And I won't go on about it at length, because I know we don't have all the time in the world, but I do feel that's something that as a society we need to be aware of as the next generation are stepping into the workplace, how they are very keen to communicate virtually or via email rather than in person. I do think that this is something that organizations need to be aware of, because again, to get to that point where innovation and progression is happening, you have to have those lively discussions. And they're best off being done in person, so you can't misinterpret what people are saying. And that is something that I'm kind of starting to think about. It's like, how are we going to bring this into the workplace for the future?
Yeah, great. So, I mean, as a sociologist by training, a researcher and doctor by role, how do you believe sociology and research can support the kind of leadership and culture transformation insurers and other firms, obviously, over the next 5 to 10 years? How do you think it would be different from traditional leadership training or HR initiatives?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So sociology and organizational research kind of goes hand in hand. A lot of organizational researchers will have foundations within sociology, and then therefore those foundations are pulled through to leadership and HR. So I don't think that sociology is necessarily different. It's probably part of. However, I do think that having a sociological thinking brought in more loudly enables you to diagnose things easier and more clearly. So we don't have to concentrate on the top kind of the surface level or the top few levels. We can really drill down and understand what's going on and pull through that kind of critical thinking from the ground upwards. And how is it? Sorry, the second part of the question was.
So it was how it can support leadership and cultural transformation. And you've talked about obviously how it might be different from, I suppose, traditional leadership training or HR initiatives.
Yeah. So yeah, like I say, it's probably part of the same kind of thinking, but it is that deeper thinking. And I would say that sociology, academics generally are very poor, and they will hold their hands up, I'm quite sure, at kind of communicating with the normal world, quote unquote. And I see that as a real shame, because, like I say, kind of sociology and psychology do provide the foundations to a lot of what we understand and know works and doesn't work within organizations. And something that I'm really trying to push for is to open that barrier between the academy and the outside world. Myself, I'm kind of trying to do that with the work I do with organizations, but also like you said at the beginning, I'm really passionate about knowledge sharing. And so being able to make those links more obvious between the academic, the sociological, and then the leadership and HR, being able to kind of really expose those connections, I think will only support what leadership and HR are trying to achieve. And if that helps answer the question, or if I have answered the question.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So is there anything else that you wanted to finish on, Abbey?
Just thank you again for having me on. I think we've covered off quite a lot today. But it is something that I'm really passionate about. So if there are anyone who's listening kind of wants to know more about specific areas or has a specific problem that they want to discuss, then I'm more than happy to take some time to speak to anyone, whoever it is.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And I mean, we'll share your contact links. And if you have got any research papers that you think might be advantageous, we can link those as well for further reading from people. But yeah, they'll all be with the recordings and in the descriptions. And yeah, I just really appreciate you sort of taking the time, Abbey. It's a fascinating sort of subject, one that I'm equally passionate about myself, and I think the more that we can talk about it and educate and continue to bang that drum, as you say, the better for everybody, coming behind us and for those of us there already at the moment.
Exactly. And I think the more we talk about it, the less scared people become of talking about it. So
definitely.
Yeah. But thank you
Good.
for having me on.
Not at all. A real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.